This video focuses on the second of your lessons this week. And in the rest of this week, we're going to focus on questions 1 to 4 of the reading section of the mock exam paper. And in this lesson, we're going to look at question 1 and question 2. So just take a moment to remind yourself of the structure of this section of the paper. So there are 4 questions. Question 1 worth 4 marks, where you list 4 things that you learn from a very specific section of the text. Question 2 worth 8 marks, where you evaluate how the writer uses language. Question 3, where you are looking at how the writer structures the text to interest the reader. Again, that's worth 8 marks. And then the big 20 marker at the end of the reading, where it gives you a statement and you're asked to what extent you agree. And before you start looking at those specific questions, I want you to just remind yourself of the text, because it is a few weeks since you read it. If you don't have your exam paper with you yet, they are all on Firefly. So at the start of the Firefly task that you've been set, there is a copy of the booklet that you would have been working on in school. And in there is a copy of the insert and all the exam paper and anything else that you would need. So just a reminder, if you look at on the screen here, I've got a little screenshot of the insert. So just a reminder that this is a piece of 21st century prose fiction. And it's an extract from Graham Joyce's The Silent Land. And it's an extract from the beginning of the novel that was written in 2010. So just as you read that extract, something to think about, and these questions, answering these questions will help you to answer the exam questions more effectively. So the first thing I want you to do is to list 5 adjectives to describe how the protagonist, how that main character of Zoe feels throughout this text, and maybe her emotions, her feelings will change throughout that. So if you just track her feelings through the text, you'll find that you've then got a bank of vocabulary and ideas to then draw upon for your later answers. Now, the second thing that I've asked you to do on there is to trade them in. So you might have come up with 5 adjectives, but can you use a more sophisticated word? Can you use more sophisticated vocabulary to really challenge yourself? So for example, if you said that she was stunned, you might swap that out for mesmerised. Instead of saying that she was calm, you might say that she was very tranquil. So have a look at the text again, do that little task with the adjectives to help you get your head back into that text that you read at the start of your mock exam those few weeks ago. So pause the video while you do that, and then when you've read it and when you've done that task, press play again and we'll move on. So the first question it's a 4-mark question. And it's very straightforward. It's asking you to list 4 things that you learn from a specific part of the text. And the national average for this question is very close to 4 out of 4. It's 3.8 or something like that. And that's because most people do get full marks on this question. However, marks can be lost and are lost sometimes through making some straightforward errors that we can avoid. So that's what this little section of this lesson is going to be looking at, how we can avoid making those errors that would lose us 1 or 2 valuable marks at the start of our exam paper. So there's a reminder of what the paper looked like. So it gives you the space to record the 4 things that you're being asked to list, and it reminds you that these are from lines 1 to 5. Okay, so only from that section of the text, and this is worth 4 marks, up to a maximum of 4 marks. This is what the exam board have said in their mark scheme, and this is their instruction really for examiners when they're marking your paper. And they're expected to give you 1 mark for every point that you make about Zoe's surroundings. And the response that you give, it must be true. So it has to be drawn from lines 1 to 5 of the text, and only from lines 1 to 5. You might find a detail about Zoe's surroundings in line number 8. You wouldn't get the mark for it if you wrote it down here, because even though it is right about Zoe's surroundings, it's not from the right part of the text. So again, that's a way to just avoid throwing away valuable marks. The responses must relate to Zoe's surroundings. So if you included something about Zoe or commented on something that was irrelevant to a point, then you wouldn't get the marks for it. You can quote the text directly, or you can paraphrase, putting them into your own response. If you do paraphrase and you cover more than 1 point, you would get a point. You get a mark for each point that you made. Okay, but the information that you include has to be precise enough, and that'll make more sense when we have a look at some examples in a second where people haven't perhaps got the mark because they weren't precise enough. Now, if you decide that you think you found a loophole to get 4 out of 4 on this question by just copying down all of lines 1 to 5, because surely there will be at least 4 things in there from Zoe's surroundings, the exam board are onto you, and they've identified that as something that examiners are not allowed to give any marks for, because that isn't showing any understanding. It doesn't show that you have understood what you've read and selected the information. That's copying. So if you do that, if you just copied out lines 1 to 5, or whichever lines were the focus in a different exam paper, you wouldn't get any marks for that, for doing that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that mark scheme into practice and look at some example answers and see whether or not they would get the marks. So compare what you see on the screen with what you thought. And we'll see why they got the marks, but perhaps more importantly, why some of them didn't get the marks and why somebody might have lost one of those valuable marks at the start of this exam paper. So the first answer that's suggested there is that it is snowing, and quite straightforward, that would get the mark because that is correct. It is snowing in the text. Now the second one, it is dark, wouldn't get a mark. And the reason why it wouldn't get a mark is because it's not specific enough. And that suggests that it's dark outside, it's nighttime, whereas actually what the text says is that there's a dark outline, and it's referring to what can be seen in the distance, the dark outline of the resort. So for that reason, if you wrote it is dark, you wouldn't get a mark. If you wrote that the snow is beautiful, you would get a mark. If you wrote that it is gentle, you wouldn't get a mark there because it's not precise enough. Just be really careful if you're using pronouns like it. What do you mean? What are you specifically referring to? Is it that the snow's gentle? Is the light gentle? You need to be precise to show the level of your understanding. So if you just wrote it is gentle, you wouldn't get a mark. And then the last 3 on here are all correct. So the 6 pointed flakes landing on her jacket sleeves, that she is on a mountain, and that the mountain air is cold. All of those would get you the marks. Now let's have a look at the bottom half of that grid. So the first one, that the air is icy, yes, that would get you a mark. The second one, the air smells of pine resin, would get you a mark. However, the air smells wouldn't. It's being specific about the fact that it smells of pine or smells of resin that would get you the mark there. So just the fact that the air smells wouldn't get you a mark. Now, the next one would get you a mark because that's correct. As is the following one, because it's the resort village that is below her. Now the last 2 are both wrong, and I suppose the last 2 right ones show you why these 2 are wrong. Bernard suggests that it's a person, whereas actually it's the name of the resort village. So you need to put the full title to show that you understand what it is and that you haven't misunderstood that it's a person, for example. And she isn't in the village. The village is below her. So again, it's that understanding of where she is in relation to her setting. She isn't in the village. The resort village is below her because she's on the slopes skiing. Okay, so that should just show you why you have to be really precise about what you put as your answers. Okay. We're now going to have a look at question number 2. So this is the 8-mark question that asks you how the writer uses language. And again, the examiner's report, so this is based on feedback from your papers, the patterns that we noticed when we marked them. So firstly, the question focused on Zoe's feelings and how language was being used to show those. The best answers referred to Zoe's feelings. Some people didn't mention her feelings at all. They just talked about language being used. So if you think about, this is why I've asked you to do that task where you've gone through the text thinking about how the protagonist feels. The best answers started talking in the opening sentence about how Zoe was feeling, what her emotions were. Some answers themselves were excellent. There was nothing wrong with what people had written, but they were limited because they only referred to one quotation. So the criteria does say that you need to refer to a range of evidence. So unless you included a second quotation, it made it very difficult to give you a high mark there. Some answers were limited because they referred really generically to language. Language is a huge word to throw around. You have to be really specific about the writer's methods that you've identified. So was it alliteration? Was it a simile? Was it a particular verb that you thought was powerful in conveying Zoe's emotions? So if you throw the word language around, the examiner isn't going to think you understand what you're referring to. So you need to be precise about the method that you identify and the accuracy of your terminology there. Even if it's talking about connotations or semantic fields, those are often good things to spot. Now, this last one, you are only being asked to talk about a very small section of this text. You're not being asked to talk about the whole thing, but it is important that you recognise how this extract fits into the text as a whole. So rather than seeing the paragraphs that you have to write about as having a brick wall built around them, think of them as having windows around them. And when you're reading that paragraph or that couple of paragraphs, just bear in mind what's happened before and what's come after, because that affects what that paragraph means and how you should respond to it as a reader. So whilst the question focuses on the extract, the impact of the writer's choices on the reader go way beyond this, and they need to be acknowledged in the most perceptive answers, recognising what was about to happen and how she felt at that moment was key. So let's just remind ourselves of the question and of the extract itself. It's a very short extract, only from lines 9 to 14. And you're being asked, how does the writer use language here to describe Zoe's feelings? So that has to be the focus of the question. You can comment on words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. So what I want you to do, so pause the video and just do this, is reread this extract, just this one paragraph, lines 9 to 14. And at the end of each sentence, I want you to consider, how does the character of Zoe feel? And bear in mind what happens to her next. Okay, so pause the video while you just have a little look at that, and then press play when you're ready. Okay, hopefully you've thought really carefully about how Zoe was feeling and how she's mesmerised and exhilarated really by the setting that she was in. But this question is about language, and if you don't identify language methods really precisely, then that again limits the marks that you have available to you. So to help you practice and to use the terminology accurately, there's a little grid on the screen there. Again, it's in the Firefly page and it's also in the booklet at the top of the task. I want you to see if you can find an example of each of those things in the text. Once you've had a little look, press play on the video again, and you can have a look at the examples that we've found for you. Okay, so have a go, pause the video. So the grid that you've just been completing is on the screen there, but this time there are some examples filled in there for you. You might have found another example, and that's fine. These are just possible answers that you could have used. So you've got things like the personification, so the way the mountain breathes back. Obviously mountains can't breathe, so that personifies that mountain. The repetition of snow and silence, which is also an example of sibilance, that S sound that's repeated. There's a semantic field throughout this text of stillness, of death. It refers to an arrest of life, and death itself, the pre-echo of death. There are two examples of declaratives where it adopts the first person. It switches from third person, where it talks about Zoe and she and they, and switches to the first person I, and it's those italicized sentences at the end where she says, I am alive, I am an eagle, where she's declaring, and obviously she isn't actually an eagle, so that one is a metaphor too. So you've now got the ingredients for your answer. You've identified Zoe's feelings throughout the text, and you've also identified a number of the writer's methods that are used to convey those. So the next step is to join those together. Now these videos are limited to being 15 minutes long, so this one will stop, and then you need to start the next one where we're going to have a look at some example answers from the exam board, showing you how you achieve different marks because of the quality of your answer. Okay, so as soon as you're ready, press play on the next video.